Yes, this is the Film Raider podcast. Today we are taking a close look at the Raiders' first preseason game of the year, the Hall of Fame game against the Jags. It's been a long time since our last episode, so just a reminder, the whole point of this podcast, the whole purpose of this show, is to discuss the finer details around the Las Vegas Raiders, right? We want to take a look at the below the surface level information. We are not here to give hot takes. We're not even here to just give opinions on certain things, right? We are going to take a close look, study the film, study trends, study players, strengths, and weaknesses. And every time we have an episode, the goal is going to be to present the listener with information that maybe you can't just gather through watching the games on Sunday, right? Every episode is going to require some sort of extra research or digging on my end, so that I am providing information that actually helps the fan base learn a little bit more about the team, right? There's so many podcasts and shows out there that talk about the Raiders. A lot of them do a great job. We are going to be focusing on the below the surface information. All right, so with that being said, let's just jump right into it. Today's not going to be too long of an episode, but we are discussing the Raiders' first preseason game. I said this last year, and I'll say it again. Way too many times fans get caught up in the score when talking about preseason football, as well as talking about statistics. I think it's very important for us to remember that statistics and the final score mean absolutely nothing in preseason. Okay, I mean, it's great if a player puts up a really big game, puts up good numbers. It's great if the Raiders win. However, it really means towards the season. Okay, if a running back gets a large yards per carry average, or if a receiver has a lot of receiving yards, that looks great. And it could seem really great, right? But remember, these are players going up against second and third string opponents. These guys should be putting up big numbers, right? And it really just doesn't compare to how they would be doing against week one starters come the regular season. Okay, so don't let statistics cloud your mind, cloud your thinking. Okay, what I want to focus on when we're talking preseason football is, I want to look at personal performances, right? We want to look for trends in different players' playing abilities. What are they doing well? What are they struggling with? Are we seeing improvement anywhere from last year, right? And also, how are they being used? How is the coaching staff trying to use them in preseason? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it is telling us how they're going to be used in the regular season, but I still think it's interesting because it gives us a little bit of a window into what the coaching staff is thinking around certain players. So with that being said, let's dive right into it. And I just talked about usage. Let's start by talking about player usage. On the offensive side of the ball, Lester Cotton and Tyron Johnson each had the most snaps offensively in the first game. Okay, Lester Cotton at guard. Tyron Johnson obviously is competing for that final outside receiving position. Both of these players are very interesting. Lester Cotton, there's been a lot of talk about him maybe winning the starting job at right guard. In rewatching the game, I think Lester Cotton looked pretty good in the running game. I was kind of impressed with his run blocking. However, in pass protection, there were still just a few mental lapses. He was a little slow to react to a twist at one point. Just a few little moments. I think he still has plenty to clean up in pass protection. Just a few moments stood out that would concern me a little bit if the plan is for Lester Cotton to be the starter in week one, right? Tyron Johnson, everyone noticed Tyron Johnson in this first game. He had plenty of passes thrown to him. As I mentioned, he had plenty of snaps. I think it's interesting to see how many snaps he got versus the other wide receivers that he's battling with. I think it's clear that the coaching staff wants to give Tyron Johnson as big of a chance as possible to win that third receiver position, right? We already have Devontae Williams out wide. We've already got Hunter Renfrow in the slot. We need to know who that third outside receiver is. And Tyron Johnson's interesting because he's a speed receiver, but he's also kind of built. He has a good body size. He has a good build to him. So he's not just this tiny little, speed receiver. He's actually got good size. What I really liked about him in this first preseason game was his willingness to block. And I actually put out a couple clips on YouTube. You could look for our new YouTube channel, The Film Raider. But I was pretty impressed with Tyron Johnson's willingness to block, even taking on the number 1 overall pick, Trayvon Walker, at one point with a pretty good block on an outside run. But, I do think it's interesting because whoever wins this third receiver role, right, whoever that fourth threat in the passing game is behind our two receivers and Darren Waller, they're going to have some potential opportunity for some big plays. I think Tyron Johnson's a very intriguing player to possibly win that last role in the passing game because, as we already talked about, Tyron Johnson is a field stretcher. He is athletic. And with the other names that we have in this passing offense, I think whoever wins this role is going to have plenty of one-on-one opportunities, probably not against the defense's best coverage player either, right? So I think potentially Tyron Johnson or whoever does win this final role in the passing game offensively, they are going to have some potential for some chunk plays this season because defenses just aren't going to be able to focus on them. And if Tyron Johnson doesn't win the role, that's fine. I know that Mac Hollins is pretty athletic as well. There's Keelan Cole. We're going to talk about him here in a few moments. But I'm intrigued by Tyron Johnson. He had a few passes that he probably should have held on to, but I do like the effort he's putting in, and keep an eye on his ability to block in the next preseason game. Since we are talking about wide receivers, I guess we should talk about a few other ones. Taking a look at Keelan Cole. Cole had a good amount of snaps early on in the game. What I found interesting about Keelan Cole was 100% of his snaps came from the slot. So this is what I talk about when we say, pay attention to the usage in preseason. So obviously with 100% of Keelan Cole's snaps coming from the slot, that really kind of tells us what his best chance of making the team is. Right? He needs to be the depth piece at that slot receiver role. And he's got to prove to Josh McDaniels that he could handle that in the McDaniels offense. I don't really have any strong opinions on how Cole played. I don't think he flashed in any way. I don't think he looked terrible. But just something to keep an eye on. Cole is playing primarily from the slot, or at least he did in week 1 of the preseason. So we also have Demarcus Robinson. I didn't see anything notable from Demarcus Robinson. At one point, he kind of got owned on a release versus press coverage. At one point, was forced to take a really wide release. Just something to keep an eye on. It was just one play, so I don't know that it's a trend, but I definitely noticed that. That's about it for the wide receivers, though. We could jump over to the defensive side of the ball. Corner Chris Jones had the most snaps of anyone on defense with 50 snaps. Bryce Cosby had the second most snaps with 40. You also have Luke Masterson and Darian Butler right up there next. Two guys that I want to talk about on the defensive side of the ball, though, are our rookie defensive tackles. Neil Farrell Jr., he had 34 snaps, which was the 8th most snaps on the defensive side of the ball. And then Matthew Butler, who had the 5th most snaps on the defensive side of the ball at 37. Both of these rookie defensive tackles got a lot of playing time in the second half. This was their first game action in the NFL, so I had a lot of fun watching these two guys. Neil Farrell Jr., he's a really big-bodied guy, talking 320 plus pounds. He is a typical nose tackle. I think that Farrell Jr. played pretty well. Again, if you look for us on YouTube, we have a couple cut-ups of Neil Farrell Jr. and Matthew Butler in their first preseason game. But Neil Farrell, he's a big guy, definitely looks like he could hold down nose tackle. My concern with Neil Farrell is I just question his upper body strength, right? If you watch the game, I think he's credited with 3 pressures, and he had a couple power rushes where he was able to turn the offensive lineman in front of him, which is great. That's a really good start to his career for just his first preseason action, right? But I think he needs to prove that he could use his arms a little more. He's got to show a little more upper body strength if he's going to win versus NFL starters. So at this point, it's a good start for Farrell. He got some pressures, he showed power, he showed strength, but he's got to be able to show some upper body strength as well, not just leg drive. He's got to be able to use his arms, use his hands to get off of blocks and show that he could control the offensive lineman in front of him, right? He's already got the size. He's already got the power in his base. You definitely want that in your nose tackle. But if he's going to be more than just an early down rotational guy, let's see how he develops his use of hands. Now talking about Matthew Butler, number 73, the rookie defensive tackle. What I found interesting about Matthew Butler was where he was lining up. He kind of lined up all over the place. Both him and Kendall Vickers were kind of the most diversely used players along the defensive line, right? So again, I think it's interesting to see that with Butler, because I think it's pretty clear that the coaching staff is trying to put him in as many different positions as possible and see how he handles it, right? And in week 1, his first preseason action, I think he handled it pretty well. He also had a good pass rush, and he had a couple nice plays against the run as well. He didn't flash, and neither really did Farrell, right? But they both played pretty well. I think it's a solid start for them, a good foundation for them to build on. Keep an eye on the Raiders' 2 rookie defensive tackles. Number 93, Neil Farrell Jr., big-bodied guy with a lot of power. How is his use of hands going to develop? And also keep an eye on number 73, rookie defensive tackle Matthew Butler. Keep an eye on where number 73 is lining up, and take note on how he does at different spots along the defensive line. Right? That's what I'm going to be looking for, and we will definitely talk more about that next week. A couple other things to note, just in terms of usage. Let's see, Kendall Vickers. I already kind of mentioned Vickers. Vickers and Matthew Butler were both used in many different ways along the defensive line. So same thing for Vickers that I just said for Butler. Right? Keep an eye on him, keep an eye on where he's used and how he holds up as well. Another thing that I found interesting, how about Nate Hobbs? Nate Hobbs played most of his snaps out wide in this first preseason game. He played on the perimeter instead of in nickel where he played most of last year. I watched a lot of Nate Hobbs this offseason. I really like Nate Hobbs, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Nate Hobbs play more on the outside this year, because he has the size, he has the athleticism, he has the ability at the line of scrimmage, and he's willing to step up against the run. I just think Nate Hobbs has so much potential as a corner that he could do more than just play in the slot, right? So when the Raiders are out there playing in their base defense with only 2 corners on the field, I think Nate Hobbs might actually be that second corner potentially. Maybe they'll be a little more rotational about it, but I would not be surprised to see Hobbs play a little more on the perimeter when the Raiders are only playing with 2 corners on the field, and then maybe he bumps inside in certain situations, maybe on third down, right? But we know that this coaching staff really likes versatile players, and if Hobbs can prove to play on the outside and play in nickel, then that just allows the Raiders to be a little more creative with the way they run their defense and with the way they alter their approach based on each week's opponent. Right. So with Hobbs playing a majority of his snaps on the outside, newest Raider Darius Phillips, I mean, maybe not the newest, but one of the newest signings this offseason, Darius Phillips, he played a majority of his snaps in the slot. Now, previously in his career, he was more of a perimeter player. So definitely interesting there. Phillips is another guy to keep an eye on here in this next preseason game, right? How does he hold up playing at nickel when he doesn't really have much experience at nickel, at least in his career thus far in the NFL, right? So I think that's the last note in terms of usage that I wanted to bring up. Let's see, there's a few other players that we could talk about. Jumping back to the offensive line, I think Andre James stood out. You know, the concern with Andre James has been his physicality, his power, his strength. That was the concern last year, and James definitely played better throughout the year last year. I think he ended on a pretty strong note, but still that's the concern, right? Is he strong enough? Can he get stronger in order to win this starting job in the first year under Josh McDaniels? I think Andre James looked a little bit stronger in this first preseason game. Now, I know he's not going up against starting players. He's probably not going up against the best defensive lineman that he's going to face. But he had a very strong performance when he was out there in that first game. He looked good in pass protection, and he had a little bit of power to him when he was run blocking as well. Overall, I think Andre James might have been the most impressive offensive lineman to me. At least that's how he stood out to me. I know a lot of people are talking about Dylan Parham. Pro Football Focus put it out there that he didn't allow a pressure in his first preseason game. I know fans are excited about that. Look, I was actually a little surprised to see that from Pro Football Focus because there were definitely a couple plays where Parham did get beat in pass protection. I guess maybe the quarterback had gotten rid of the ball quickly and it didn't count as a pressure. But Parham definitely had some rough moments. And with him, he's kind of like an Andre James. He's a smaller offensive lineman. He's an athletic offensive lineman. So there were a few moments where he had a little bit of trouble handling a really strong power rush. Right. So keep an eye on Parham. I think that's definitely something that we need to watch here in this rookie year for the kid. But overall, I mean, he did look good, right? It wasn't like he had a bad game in pass protection. I mean, obviously he didn't allow a pressure, clearly, according to PFF, right? So a few rough moments, that means nothing for his first preseason game. He did look good as a run blocker. I think he moves really well. He showed an ability to win leverage and stay on his blocks. So that's what I like about Parham. And really what I like about our whole offensive line is we have a very athletic offensive line. The Raiders ran a lot of running back screens in this first game. We've kind of struggled at tailback screens throughout the last couple years under Gruden. I don't even remember the last time the Raiders were really good at running screens. I personally think a well-designed screen pass is one of the most beautiful plays in football. And, clearly based on the play calling in this first preseason game, I think the Raiders really wanted to practice this as well. I believe that the Raiders have the athleticism along the offensive line to have a very dangerous screen game. So definitely pay attention to that. I'm excited to see that when the regular season rolls around. Let's see. One more offensive lineman, Munford, the rookie Munford, 7th round pick. There were a lot of people who were kind of hyping up Munford. I thought he was interesting. I had actually studied him a little before the draft. I didn't really like him that much, though. I think at tackle, his feet were a little too slow. And what's interesting about Munford is he's this huge guy, right? Munford's a big-bodied offensive lineman, but he just doesn't play with much power. So I don't know. And that's what I saw watching him in this first preseason game as well. I don't think his feet are quick enough to hold up on the perimeter, especially against athletic pass rushers. And he just doesn't play as powerful as you want to see someone of that size play. So I think that does it for the offensive side of the ball. Just a few more things that I think we should mention on the defensive side of things. Obviously, Malcolm Koontz, I think a lot of people were happy with what they saw from Koontz. Like I said, I don't want to talk about surface area stuff. I think we all noticed Koontz. The one thing that I will say about him is I think his use of hands is definitely the key, right? And he had a few moments. Obviously, he's athletic. He's a super athletic guy. But he had a few moments where he flashed the ability to use his hands and use his arms to get off of blocks, right? We saw that a few times in this first preseason game, but we didn't see it consistently, right? He's an athletic guy and he loves to try and win with an athletic pass rush. If he could get a little more consistent with his ability to use his hands, then that's the key for Malcolm Koontz. That's how he's going to become more than an occasional rotational third down pass rusher. I do think he for sure has a role as a rotational guy, though, just based on that explosiveness, right? Especially when you look at twists, right? If you're going to run some games along the defensive line, I think Malcolm Koontz is very dangerous on those twists, twisting back inside. And he actually had 2 examples of that in this first preseason game where he won just purely off of athleticism alone, right? So that's Malcolm Koontz. Keep an eye on that kid. Let's see how he develops. The final person to talk about today, I think, is Divine Diablo. I watched a bit of Diablo this offseason as well. Typically these tweeners, it doesn't work out for them. And, usually the reason is they're not strong enough to hold up in the box against the run, right? It's great to have a super athletic guy at linebacker when you're talking about coverage. But a lot of times when you're talking about the power run game, these sort of tweener players at linebacker can get bullied and end up being costly to the team as a whole, right? Well, Divine Diablo is athletic. He moves really well. And, he had a couple really good examples of playing smart, playing quick, and playing strong in the box here in this first preseason game. So that's exciting to see. Divine Diablo has to be able to take on blocks and get off of blocks if he's going to be a regular contributor this year. So keep an eye on Diablo. Specifically, keep an eye on how he does taking on blocks. Pretty good start in this first game. Let's see how that continues. Let's see if Diablo can win a starting job. So that's going to do it for today's episode. We will be back next week. Look for us on YouTube. We have a couple videos out there. Again, the channel is The Film Raider. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen. And until next week, y'all take care.